Today's topic is the war on terror and terrorism today. We are asking the question, what does the war on terror and terrorism mean to you? To share your thoughts on the air, please call us on 415-663-8492. And I really do hope that you call in. With this particular show, I feel like I've gone deep down the rabbit hole. And what an ugly topic terrorism is. And you know, it's not something that I really have delved deeply into, but I was researching for this show, and the first thing I came across was that it's very hard to define terrorism. It turns out that there isn't really any academic or legal consensus about what terrorism actually means. The only characteristic agreed upon is that terrorism involves violence and the threat of violence, but beyond that, it's very unclear. Now, the United Nations General Assembly uses a political definition, as does the U.S. Department of Defense. Quote, criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public, a group of persons, or particular persons for political purposes. The problem with these definitions is that they're entirely subjective. So, you know, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. You know, under this definition, the women's suffragette movement would be described as a terrorist movement or Indigenous people fighting for their land rights. And we have a call, I believe.
We do. Caller, what's your first name?
This is Sierra.
Hi, Sierra. Thanks so much for calling in.
Hi, Sierra.
How are you guys?
Great. So you like our topic today?
Well, it's kind of a whole sticky wicket of the whole world at this point. I have a whole bunch of stuff I'd like to put out regarding terrorism, and perhaps I'll just put it all out together.
Well, let's get started.
Take note of anything but sparks. I mean, for a lot of us, the war on terror really started on 9/11, really, which I look at as a missed opportunity to actually address the real issues and causes, such as food, shelter, land, education, and religious freedom, and folks just having a say beyond being dictated to by weapons and fear. And it's as old as humans, really. I mean, 9/11 just became about more fear and more weapons without addressing the reasons or causes. More of a militaristic police state in the guise of safety. It's like there's always been terrorists, and as you were saying earlier, it partly depends on whether you're on the winning side or the losing side.
Mm-hmm.
And what we also too often fail to address, besides others' beliefs and views and rights, is our own ignorance and knee-jerking responses, nor why, do we consider why groups may strongly dislike the U.S. or others, and what our own policy actions and corporate ownerships and the whole consumer society has caused or created worldwide.
You're right on, Sierra.
I'd like
go ahead.
More thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to end with how few of us challenge our own beliefs with dialogue rather than knee-jerking righteous certainty and weapons. Recently, some folks, I saw this on online, it was in Holland, recently some folks wrapped a Bible in a Quran cover and went up to people on the street and read folks some of the juicy parts of archaic, Bible barbarism and, cutting off hands and inequity and whatnot. And folks, got a little bit, steamed or said, oh, that's really bad, those damn like Muslims. And folks were surprised. If we consider all the rhetoric foisted on the bad, evil Muslims in the Quran and our reactions, perhaps we are the terrorists and our consuming ignorance is one main cause, along with a lack of sharing or caring. I mean, anybody can cause havoc, certainly. Do we ever question why anyone is doing what they are? And that's for the bad Muslims or whoever, what are the Crusades, etc. We all seem to cherry-pick verses to fit what we want to believe from whatever religious text or, faith we follow. And we do our best to stamp out anything different. Certainly not a simple wicket, but whoever said love your neighbor or the golden rule were simple or easy. And, is there any wealth or security beyond clean air, pure water, healthy soil, and diverse, interconnected communities of life? And the terrorism of monocultures are deadly. Diversity is actually strength and resilience, and why do we shoot first? And perhaps other humans and other life has just as much right to exist as we do. What about dialogue?
Speaking of dialogue, you're saying so many great things that I kind of want to chime in on. Sierra, and I'm so glad you called. I mean, you're getting us right to a much deeper point than most of the dialogue that goes on in this country. You reminded me of W's saying is they hate us for our way of life. Does anybody actually believe that? I mean, when somebody resorts to being a suicide bomber, I always think, boy, they are so desperate. This is the only way they feel like they can be heard or make a difference or something. And I want to actually honor and hear what someone who is willing to sacrifice their life has to say. And we tend to want to just stamp that out immediately because our true motives are not wanting to be revealed.
Well, a lot of them have been so marginalized and so hurt for so long. It's like it's just coming from a place of rage and not much to really shut down.
And it's not necessarily religious. I mean, a lot of what this country wants to do is frame it as religious zealots, but these are like political power bases that are sometimes wrapped in the Islam or the religion of the day, as Christians did for many years, centuries, and so given that these are really political power struggles of peoples, the Europeans and Americans have certainly messed in their affairs for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
My God is bigger than your God, and the biggest God there is right now is money and profit, the expense of all living things.
Yep. And guns. I mean, all this military expenditure that we are feared into is
to protect property.
It's all about protecting property.
Ownership, and it's like we don't share. It's like we own it, it's ours, and we're not going to share it, whatever it is.
Why? Well, that's what the Constitution is about, protecting property, isn't it?
Well,
oh, that's too big a worm.
Thanks for calling in, Sierra.
Thanks, Sierra.
Thanks for doing this, guys. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye. And we have another caller.
Hi, welcome to KWMR. Let's talk. What's your name, please?
Oh, hi, folks. This is Charlie. How you doing?
Hey, Charlie. Thanks so much for calling again.
Hi, Charlie.
You guys, kind of took the words out of my mouth, you and Sierra. I consider the U.S. Air Force to be a terrorist organization. I consider the use of military power to protect our interest in the oil countries to be terrorism. I don't really have respect for people that tie bombs to themselves and blow people up, I have to say, because I think if you're going to kill somebody, you should deal with the implications of that. But that's, those are people that are hopeless. I think,
Desperate measures.
Yeah. No, years of imperialism, colonialism, disrespect for, the people in the oil country lands. We all know that after the Ottomans were driven out of Iraq, Churchill promised them their own government and then proceeded to fly in King Saud from Arabia because, quote unquote, hey, one wog is just as good as another, right? It's that history, and I think that there's it's the short-term view that we always see. I don't respect people that leave bombs somewhere and then run away and let other people get blown up. But, when you turn things with military power, with air forces, in fact, the United States had a situation where it was like rent an air force. They lent our air force, paid by taxpayers, of course, to some country that was holding up our interests. And, it's just... I think that we need to take a closer look at how we're responsible for creating these people,
the U.S.
that are willing to give their lives up, because they don't want to look at a future that's been the same as the past, hundreds of years.
Well, Charlie, you're so right at going back to root causes, and you were talking about the Ottoman Empire after World War II being taken apart, and then the British and the French had a lot to do with drawing boundaries and saying, you folks are now a nation. And, over time, some balance of power was created, but in the search for oil and gas now even, and a lot of that's not talked about with regard to Syria, but I believe ultimately it's still about us going after natural resources in that part of the world. And, we can talk more about that. But do you feel like that's a motivating factor in what's happening now?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, the United States has troops in 120 countries around the world.
Yes.
And we have an airplane up in the air all the time. That's a NATO thing. And
And, that's not enough because we need to get more military spending, according to some presidential candidates.
Oh, yeah.
Well, hey, I found this online. According to Canadian geographer Professor Jules Dufour, the U.S. has established its control over 191 governments, members of the United Nations. And this conquest, occupation, and supervision of these various regions of the world is supported by an integrated U.S. network of military bases and installations which covers the entire planet. We're talking continents, oceans, and outer space. And it's, this all pertains to empire, an extensive empire. You can look these up online. Apparently, the U.S. controls about 800 military bases worldwide.
Yeah, and, I had the good fortune to travel through India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. Couldn't go to Iraq at that time, and Turkey. And, when you look somebody in the eye, it's a lot more difficult to doom them to being bombed. Is it any less cowardly to drop a bomb from 10,000 feet on somebody than it is to leave a bomb, in a department store? I don't support either one of those.
No, I think you're right. Not. I think the drone is exactly the same as someone. It's a matter of how much money you got to spend. I've got a quote here that war is terrorism on a bigger budget.
Yeah, and I also think that the humanness of the people that, we've wiped our feet on for centuries really sort of gets neutralized image-wise because we think that they're just crazy, they're a special group of crazy humans. But when you travel, and I know you all have traveled, you look at people, they're just trying to get down the road, get their kids to school, get something to eat, blah, blah, blah. But that sort of gets subverted, that reality. And so, whoop-de-doo, you've got this magic group of... do you realize how hard it is to get somebody to go to war? How hard it is for somebody to commit an act of violence?
Mm-hmm.
But our media drives really kind of depict the people we call terrorists, and I don't like a lot of what they do. But, as some, evil group that came from another planet, but they're human beings who finally had enough, as you said, desperate.
Desperate measures.
So anyway,
thanks, Charlie.
I'll get off. Thanks a lot for the show. I just think that if we can encourage the listeners and anybody else, take a deeper look at why people do things, and
yes.
try to put themselves in the place of them, because we're all people,
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Anyway, thank you. Great show.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is Let's Talk Radio with Bernie Stephan and Raven Gray. So please call us to join the conversation on 415-663-8492. We'd like to hear your ideas on what we should be dealing with ISIS or terrorism or this subject right now. We're getting some good conversation at deep levels, but there's so many sides to this subject that, if you're holding a completely different point of view, it's important that you share it. So please call in. We want to hear as many views as possible.
I read in the news the other day, it was an open letter published in it was mid-November, actually, that 4 former Air Force servicemen were accusing President Obama of creating and carrying out a drone program that is one of the most devastating forces for terrorism and destabilization around the world. According to these whistleblowers that worked in the Air Force, 90% of the people killed in drone strikes in Afghanistan and Pakistan, Yemen and Somalia between January 2012 and February 2013 were not the intended targets. They were civilians. And the Bureau of Investigative Journalism estimates that the United States has killed thousands of civilians across these countries, including hundreds of children. Anyway, these deaths are probably underreported. And we have another caller.
Hi, caller. Welcome to Let's Talk. What's your name, please?
Good afternoon. My name's Vicky, and I'm calling from Marshall.
Hi,
Vicky.
Hey. First of all, thanks you guys for doing these programs. It's extraordinary the amount of talk and how good it is to talk about all these issues. I know that it's sometimes awkward, and I felt very bad last week because you didn't get any callers, and it's just that whole concept last week was so totally overwhelming, and you feel totally useless on a single level. But
this one isn't overwhelming?
Oh yeah, this one is absolutely overwhelming. agree academically with your previous callers, but I also want to agree with what Raven just said about unintended consequences. Mainstream media talks about America's war on terror, but the reality of it is that most of the people that ISIS have killed have been other Muslims. Mm-hmm. Most of the damage that we do is the unintended consequences of civilian deaths too. I agree that the root causes of this are desperate people, but there's also the human element that these kind of movements attract bad people too. They attract bullies, and they attract inadequate people who get their rocks off killing people. So there's a very complex thing going on here, and that's what makes it so difficult to talk about. I also would like to, I know I'm slightly biased, but we talk about America's war on terror, but, most of the other countries in the world have suffered much worse than us in the previous years from these, from the various sides involved in this conflict. I mean, ISIS executed a Chinese hostage last week because they're trying to generate some following in China too. There's always going to be idiots out there, and I don't know what to do about it, and I do find it very frustrating and overwhelming. But
yes,
thank you for bringing up the conversation and for letting people vent.
Thank you.
You guys do a grand job. Thanks.
Well, Vicky, thanks so much for calling in. Bye.
Should we speak to ISIS for a minute? I must say that I tried to look at the history of terrorism, and that's just so convoluted and so complex, and it's hard to even know, how terrorism arose. Apparently, the word terrorism came from the French Revolution. That's when it was first coined, from the people who overthrew the monarchy and instituted a state of terror or reign of terror. But since then, terrorism has become. It's just so complex. I tried to understand what was happening in Syria, and I couldn't, except in very broad strokes, to come to my conclusion, which is that the U.S. is the biggest terrorist state on the planet.
And I think that W. Bush, after 9/11, used it as a rallying cry.
Didn't he?
It was more of a marketing term, kind of propaganda term. So the war on terror, as we then had it defined for us, is all those people who hate us for our lifestyle. No mention of what we're doing in their countries, but damn it, that's our oil under their land, and those people are terrorists, and therefore we must fight them. And it justified going into Afghanistan, and it justified going into Iraq.
Well, then they passed the Patriot Act, right? And that passed 45 days after 9/11, which expanded the surveillance powers of federal agencies, so that now we're all being spied on all the time. And it's just collecting and analyzing and monitoring all our phone and email communications, our bank and credit records, and the premise is we've got to root out these terrorists, but I don't buy it. And then a law was passed right after 9/11 called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force. I don't know if you've looked into that, Bernie, but
that is what allowed us to go into Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Yes,
and it just authorized the war on terror, which has no beginning and no end and no battleground and is global and is everywhere, and it's really a lot of, it's very confusing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, our meddling in other countries certainly didn't start, and we didn't start it. We followed European countries who, meddled in Africa and Asia and the Middle East, and anywhere there were resources to be exploited or labor to be exploited. We certainly carried on from the Germans and the Japanese. And so our country is not necessarily the place this all started, but clearly we have what we call American interests in the Middle East. And let's be honest, those mean that's oil needs to flow to keep our system working. And we've got a lot of corporations with a lot of investment there, and therefore we need all this military there. And people I know the Bush administration were looking for an excuse for how can we sort of get more control when there's some dictators over there that are trying to cut us out or take advantage of us or something. So how do we insert ourselves in the middle of an area, and then we call that wanting to go to democracy. So we found a handy villain. And, at that point, Al-Qaeda was the villain, but it was all about fanatical, radical, religious zealots. And so we framed it in a way that's been framed many wars before, but it was selling us a war. So this war on terror is a marketing term, but I don't know what else to call what is the ongoing war that seems like we can't get out of now.
I watched a film the other night by John Pilger. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he produced a film in 2003, which I just watched, it's an investigative piece of journalism called Breaking the Silence, The Truth and Lies in the War on Terror. He said this film is about the rise and rise of rapacious imperial power and a terrorism that never speaks its name because it is our, meaning our U.S., terrorism. And, in the film, he explains, he goes out into these countries, Afghanistan, and he goes to Washington, and he demonstrates that U.S. actions have nothing to do with fighting terrorism. It's just an open-ended war for global dominance and the control of valuable oil resources in the Middle East. And that the real danger facing us all is the increasingly aggressive military action of American imperialism and the state terrorism orchestrated by the White House. And he asked this big question, what are the real aims of this war? Who are the most threatening terrorists? Who is responsible for far greater acts of violence than those committed by the fanatics of Al-Qaeda, crimes that have claimed many more lives than September the 11th, and they're always in poor, devastated, faraway places. Yeah. Please call in and give your thoughts.
I got some numbers I'm looking at that if you think of this Bush termed war on terror that started in 2001 with the attacks at 9/11. That year, over 3,000 were killed. There were about 355 estimated terror attacks globally. That number started to shrink for a few years and then grew and grew and grew. And it sort of hit a peak in terms of number of killed 2008, 2009. And then it's gone down a little, except in 13, 14, it's really gone way up again in terms of number of attacks and number killed. So if you just measure that war on terror and those numbers, it looks like we're losing, and we're losing badly, and it's getting worse. So whatever the thought was about winning that war, did we really have in mind winning the war? Or as you were pointing out, did we have in mind allowing our military to keep our global dominance as a economic and imperialist structure?
War, with this war on terror, there, as I said before, there's no beginning, there's no end, there's no battlefield. It doesn't have an end, Bernie. It doesn't have a specific enemy other than that defined by the U.S. government, and at the moment it's ISIS. But it's just like the war on drugs, isn't it? And the war on poverty. It just goes on and on and on. And how can we define a war or get to grips with it when it's impossible to define? It's an invisible war. It's so removed from us here as well in West Marin.
It's that, though, we got to point to a threat. It seems when I was young, the word that I always heard was communists. Communism. We got to stop communism. You're a communist. That guy's a communist. Don't listen to him. We've got to get after those communists everywhere. And now I feel like we've just substituted the word terrorist. It's like a fill in the blank for the other. And if you go back, Nazi Germany, that word was the Jews. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's be clear that it's handy for government to have a shorthand for talking about all the ills of the world and pointing at scapegoats. And unfortunately, a lot of people buy into these scapegoat arguments. And I think it's a little scary that in this country there seems to be a large following for a very strong view that, there are scapegoats out there. And they're from the Islamic world. It's about Sharia law. It's about all of these foreign things that they're trying to impose on us.
It's certainly helping Donald Trump rise to favor, isn't it?
It is. And then people believe that because these terrorist attacks are happening on our soil, like in San Bernardino, it's not just France anymore. It's just not Middle East anymore. It's happening here. We better load up on guns too, so that in a way we're creating a mentality of escalating violence is the answer. And when has escalating violence ever really paid off?
Chris Hedges, who we've had he's been on KWMR before, hasn't he?
Yes.
He says that we're certainly, in November, he published an article on Truthdig and said that, we're certainly going to have another terrorist attack on American soil. And what he says about that, I don't know if you agree. If you do or don't, please call in, is that another terrorist attack in the United States will extinguish what remains of our anemic and largely dysfunctional democracy. Fear will be even more fervently stoked and manipulated by the state. The remnants of our civil liberties will be abolished. Groups that defy the corporate state, Black Lives Matter, climate change activists, and anti-capitalists, that's us, Bernie, will be ruthlessly targeted for elimination as the nation is swept into the Manichean, I don't know how to say that either, world of us and them, traitors versus patriots. Culture will be reduced to sentimental doggerel and patriotic kitsch. Violence will be sanctified in Hollywood and the media as a purifying agent. Any criticism of the crusade or those leading it will be heresy. The police and the military will be deified. Nationalism, which at its core is about self-exaltation and racism, will distort our perception of reality. We will gather like frightened children around the flag. We will sing the national anthem in unison. We will kneel before the state and the organs of internal security. We will beg our masters to save us. We will be paralyzed by the psychosis of permanent war. That's Chris Hedges. He's quite dramatic.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds exactly like Nazi Germany, though.
But doesn't it sound like what's happening in the U.S.?
Yes, and well, I want to go back to Nazi Germany because I was born to German parents who actually lived through it. My mother suffered from going into bomb shelters and wondering whether a home was leveled or not. My father fought in the German military. And when I learned about Holocaust and challenged my parents, I kind of vowed that this should not happen again. But that's where I see it's so parallel. I mean, obviously, Chris Hedges is predicting that's not happening yet, but we see all the signs of that we're moving in that direction. There's no question that the amount of spending in this country under the heading of security keeps wanting to go up. It isn't enough. Charlie talked about all these bases around the planet that are U.S. military bases to ensure our power over these countries not turning on our American interests.
So today we'd like to hear your thoughts about the war on terror. Who reaps the benefits? Who suffers the most? I mean, I'm also wondering, are you worried about this threat of terrorism? Apparently a poll was done recently, I don't have the dates here, but it was done just in the last month that from CNN and the New York Times that found out that, it's the number one thing that people are worried about in America. And haven't been this worried about the threat of terrorism since 9/11. So it's on an all-time high since the recent attacks in Paris and San Bernardino. So, I'd like to know, who do you think the real terrorists are? Are you afraid of the threat of terrorism? And, who do you think is... Well, what's the link between the U.S. military-industrial complex and war-making? I found a quote from I'm British, and I found a quote from the former British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook. This is before ISIS came about. And he says, the truth is there is no Islamic army or terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. And any informed intelligence officer knows this. But there is a propaganda campaign to make the public believe in the presence of an intensified entity representing the quote-unquote devil, only in order to drive TV watchers to accept a unified international leadership for a war against terrorism. And the country behind this propaganda is the U.S. By the way, they don't call it the war on terror anymore. President Obama changed that. Very confusing. The Department of Defense changed officially the name from Global War on Terror to Overseas Contingency Operation, which is just ridiculous.
That's like whitewashing.
Yeah, but then that was in 2009. But then in 2010, they changed it again to Countering Violent Extremism.
Can I read a quick email here from
please.
A friend of mine? This is from Murray Seward. He says, I was walking across the campus at College of Marin when out of the blue I found myself thinking about terrorist attacks in places like school campuses. Mm-hmm. Suddenly I felt less secure than in the good old days. That's a very short note, but it underlines how the fear is widespread. We all feel it. So our government is very effective at its messaging to us.
I feel it. I don't know why. I I just do.
Yeah.
But
Yet when we look around us, we haven't at all suffered here like people in closer Europe for a long time suffered lots of bombings and terrorist attacks before we were hit on 9/11, 2001 in the Twin Towers.
I guess I worry about shootings more. Is that terrorism? That's the thing with this definition on terrorism. When a white guy goes into a school and shoots a bunch of kids, it's just a mass shooting. But
or if it's a Christian against a Planned Parenthood office.
It's a mass shooting.
Yeah,
it's not terrorism unless it's a Muslim.
Well, that's people are pointing that out, fortunately. But that inconsistency sort of reminds us that what was this really? It was for us going to war in all these foreign places and tightening up more restrictions and more security and surveillance in the United States. I mean, this
it's crazy.
Patriot Act, was again a way for people who want to believe that somehow by monitoring everybody, everywhere, all the time, that someone's going to prevent it. Well, it hasn't prevented it, and that's got a lot of people frustrated right now because the investment in this homeland security and all of the beefing up of intelligence throughout our huge apparatus still misses things. So their claim that if you just give us more money and we just put in another agency that somehow things will be better, or this rhetoric that says we will wipe out every last one of those ISIS fighters. Well, that's so absurd because, people that live there when it's their territory and they've become radicalized for whatever reason and they've taken on whatever tactics they feel they must. But this Sunni population can't be just genocided out of here. We will always have the competing interest for power and property. And if we would only butt out, I'm really desperate for saying, let's close the Department of Defense and butt out of everything. Now, people call that isolationism, but I think we can't really get to peace by more violence.
No, violence begets violence, but I honestly don't think that's a realistic dream, Bernie. It's a nice dream, though.
No, but indeed, we are stoking the hatred of us in those areas. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like when France had its tragedy in Paris, the only thing the French president felt he could do was call on other nations to support him in escalated military things. So if our military bombing isn't working, then they say it has to be boots on the ground. But eventually, I don't know, it hasn't worked. So, hi, caller. Welcome to KWMR.
Oh, hi, you guys. This is Charlie again.
Hi, Charlie.
I'll get off quick. Anyway, you're making such great points and stimulating all these thoughts. I just wanted to mention earlier, we created a holy war against Islam ourselves. How did we do that? Well, we make these deals with a lot of no good people as long as it suits us. But we took out Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. Now, the uniqueness about those two guys, not that I particularly liked them, was that they were secular. They didn't want a mullah or an ayatollah to run the country,
Yep.
And so we took them out. And then unleashed this whole, maelstrom of fighting, of course, one Muslim to another, unfortunately. But, when people talk about crazy, once you go after somebody's religion, you've really opened up a can of worms that you can't close or deal with. And that's why all these people are streaming into these countries to fight Western forces, is because they're trying to protect their religion. And, like I said, I wasn't a big fan of Hussein or Gaddafi, but, those two guys kept the lid on whole, kind of radical Islamic, whatever that means, situation, and we purposely.
Well, what do you think, Charlie, was our motivation to take them out? Was it maybe because they weren't cooperating with us as much as we wanted in terms of letting the oil flow into the world capital markets?
Well, there was that, and I'll never forget the name of our, senior State Department person, April Glaspie. She was the one who told Saddam Hussein on behalf of the United States that if he invaded Kuwait, which was actually part of Iraq at one point, but was sort of sectioned off by the West and, somebody with billions of dollars. She said they wouldn't get involved in an inner Arab conflict. She sort of set them up like a bowling pin. And once again, I don't like what they did, doing that invasion. But I think that banking has a lot to do with it. I think that there's a big banking structure lurking behind the scenes that those two guys wouldn't play ball with.
There's that part of the dollar being the world currency for buying and selling fossil fuels.
Yeah, anyway, when people start to depict, crazy Muslim people, going to war and going from one country to another, leaving their homes and their families, they're fighting for a religion. And, I'm not what I would call a religious person, but we helped create that. We destabilized a situation that was not, Muslim centered, but we made it that way. And now we're running around saying that they're the ones who are religious fanatics and everything. Anyway, I'll get off.
Thanks, Charlie.
Calling again.
Thanks for calling back.
Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
And we have another caller on the line. What's your name, please?
It's Sierra again.
Oh, boy, we get repeats today. But that's good. That's conversation.
And I just got to say, one thing we're kind of leaving out of it is basically we are all terrorists. With every waking dollar, we're creating the future. And it's like you look at climate change and everything else, and it's like, we're all doing it. We're driving in circles. We're chasing dollars. We're trading our lives for dollars. And it's like, it's all somebody else's problem. Christmas presents. It's like everybody's going to the malls and buying crap that nobody really needs and wrapping it up in paper. It's like we are terrorists to every other life form on this planet because we've reduced it all to dollars and money. And it's not necessarily that we don't care, but we don't think about it. And it's like all that we're leaving behind in our terroristic, focus on money and ownership is landfills, poisoned water, bad air, and, destruction. And it's like, if that's not terrorism, I don't know what is.
Boy, you're so right. And I've been holding that view as well, that we're all complicit in this, unconsciously for the most part. But it's good to raise the consciousness that we are players in this. We can't just separate ourselves from others as being terrorists, that when we support the status quo, we are supporting this kind of exploitation that causes the warfare.
And it's all just ignorance. And how do you fight ignorance, or how do you have education? And it's like, what is an education?
Well, what are we doing right now?
Education.
Yeah, it's not ignorance for me. I'm not ignorant, and I definitely object to being called complicit, because every day for my entire life I've been an activist fighting these things, and I think a lot of it comes down to fear. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to get.
Personally, I am complicit. It's like I don't do the battles. Like for example, with my family or my daughter, it's like it's easier to drive to school than ride a bike, or
But those are small potatoes, Sierra. It's tiny, tiny things. When you look at the military boot print of the U.S. military-industrial complex, that is what's really killing the planet. It's not you. Like the world, the media and the corporate...
No. It's tiny things, but we're the ones that are allowing the military to continue. We're not up with our pitchforks and saying, hey, we don't want our money going to this.
Well, you can take your dollar out, but how do you go against the military-industrial complex? I mean, how do you...
How many of us search for clothing or pants that aren't made in a sweatshop? Right?
Me, I do. And that doesn't say I'm so great, but what I'm saying is that you got to understand the advertising industry as well, and the television and the power of media to dumb down the nation and control them. There are specific people who are designing this system, and I don't think you, Sierra, and your family are responsible or complicit in that.
Well, I want to join Sierra in this view of complicity, because it's unintentional. None of us want to. Now, you are more aware than most people, Raven, and you are consciously resisting and moving against that system. Most of us don't. Most of us on our day-to-day basis do, as Sierra was saying, take the easy road. That means getting in the car rather than getting rid of the car and doing it all by bike and on foot. So we are indeed and I'm not wanting to blame us, but I think we have to take some responsibility for what our country does. And our country is doing horrendous things. And I think Sierra's saying, let's not always point at others. Let's start looking at ourselves.
Well, don't we have to do both,
Yes.
Sierra?
I mean, Christmas shopping, even, it's like we're all going out and buying stuff and wrapping it. And perhaps, the biggest gifts that we can really give someone is like air, water, and soil, and like leaving intact ecosystems rather than like buying a piece of junk made someplace to show somebody that we love them.
I agree.
Boy, Sierra, you are very thought-provoking, so thank you so much for your contribution to our conversation.
Sierra.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Let's talk about eco-terrorism for a minute, because by all definitions of eco-terrorism, that's me. I'm an eco-terrorist for sure. And, a few years ago, the FBI called radical environmental activists the number one domestic terrorist threat. That's me. I'm the number one domestic terrorist threat. It's ridiculous, Bernie. They've downgraded that to be one of the most serious domestic terrorism threats in the U.S. today. But, the point is that I'm fighting to help Indigenous people preserve their lands.
Yeah, but you're risking our capitalist system. You're threatening our capitalist
Who are the real
establishment.
terrorists? The people who are plundering and pillaging and raping the planet, or me who is trying to defend the rights of nature?
Well, that's what's so crazy about that word terrorist. It's often just the other side of freedom fighter. I see you as a fighter for the environment to protect it, and I see myself in that way too. I'd like to think of myself as a freedom fighter, but the people that I attack verbally or through thought, like the corporate structure and the system, they fight back and they marginalize us, and that's why they call us terrorists, and they like to categorize us. So eco-terrorist is a nice little category.
But the thing with the so-called eco-terrorist movement is it basically has been squashed in the last 20 years because the FBI came after us really hard and arrested all the core activists and put them in 20, 30-year jail terms. And now people have gone a bit, quiet.
Soft. Yeah, I mean, there were indeed, as in my youth, it feels like a lot more young people. Now, we were fighting the Vietnam War. We were trying to protect forests from being cut, and so people were indeed sitting up in trees, and they were spiking trees, and they were monkey wrenching
Not so
to
much
fight
anymore.
back. No, that's been stopped, and I do think the power of the state has gotten stronger, and I think the ability for activists to be effective has been diminished on purpose.
Me too.
But I'm glad we're speaking out against it.
I am definitely speaking out against it. I had an email here from somebody online that said, if I can find it here, she basically said that she's not worried about terrorism. What she's really worried about is the state of the oceans. Well, here we go. At this moment, I feel like the biggest threat to my American way of life and the safety of my child are environmental. I swim in the bay, and sometimes it makes me so sick. Pollution and overfishing are destroying the oceans. The kelp and phytoplankton produce the majority of Earth's oxygen. Certainly, ISIS is horrific, especially for our brothers and sisters across the world. I don't want to diminish that experience, but the biggest threat to my way of life is a different kind of wrong. To which I would respond that it's all connected.
It's both. I mean, it isn't one or the other. You don't get to, I say, choose that this is the ultimate issue here. I mean, destroying the environment is destroying the base of life of future generations of humans and all the other species we've co-evolved with. Yeah. So that's definitely true. And then war is one of the quickest ways to get to extinction, isn't it? I mean,
I would think, yeah.
It's certainly, we can't seem to learn the lesson that it's futile. For the most part, countries spend more than they have. They put themselves in debt to future generations to try to stop some foreign invasion or to protect their rights to some resource, some asset. In the end, everybody loses. I mean, we don't know of many places where war in the end has succeeded.
No, but war is very good for squashing dissent on the home front when there's civil unrest happening. It unites people against a common enemy and distracts them from what's really happening, the real issues of climate change and biological diversity decline and ocean acidification, etc.
We have another caller. Welcome to KWMR. What's your name, please?
Ann Sands from Dogtown.
Hey, Ann. Thanks so much for calling in.
Hi, Ann.
Hi. You're doing such a great job, Raven. I think the big deal with terrorism is that we need to offer the so-called terrorist options. other options, like helping them get healthy, helping them with their families, education, medical care, hands-on, person to person, like what Rotary does, and other wonderful organizations that go into these areas and offer the people an option out.
That's like treating them with love as opposed to killing them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of bombs, you drop pamphlets of, this is in their language. Here are some services we can offer you. We want to come help. We want to do what you need to have for your own community. We're not going to go in and say, we're going to build you a hospital. We're going to go in and say, what do you need in the way of health care? What do you want? What can we do to help you at your community level and show you some alternatives?
And don't we have a greater responsibility to do that sort of thing, since we're the ones that created the destabilization in the first place, created the havoc, and now we have some responsibility to not just walk away?
Yep. And in terms of all the military bases around the world, a lot of them are, they're closing them down. Instead of tearing them down, convert them into something useful. Universities, teaching hospitals, do something with them. Community centers, give it to the people.
Well, once again, that's a lovely dream.
I think it's more than a dream.
Well, it's a vision.
Absolute reality. Well, it's happening. I mean, people are doing things. I keep coming up with Rotary, but, Rotary goes into these very, very unstable countries and communities and gives polio vaccines. I mean, they risk their lives to go in there and do that.
I want to commend you for thinking in terms of outside the box, Anne. Yeah. And I think you're following in the footsteps of your dear husband, Russ, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I read something here about, how does violence happen? Why does it happen? Some of the points were when we're desensitized to death and killing, violence increases. When we become more detached from each other, from common unifying beliefs, then that violence increases. When we allow hateful ideologies to make groups or classes of people to be viewed as different, bad, or even less than human, then violence increases. When we are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, violence increases. When we become more efficient and practiced at killing behaviors, then it increases.
Yeah.
And when we have easy access to handguns. So I thought that was a pretty good list.
It is a good list, and I think that a lot of the young men and young women that become that are recruited into violent movements, like ISIS or whoever, have no other options. They do not see another way.
What do you make of Europeans and American disaffected youth wanting to go to the Middle East and join up with ISIS? What do you think?
It's the same thing. They feel like they have no other options. They're not given opportunities to do things that are positive for themselves and their families and their communities, and they see this as a way to get attention, a way to have some meaning in their lives, and it's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, well, you're so right, but I like that you're getting to that level of what is it that is the human need underlying all of this.
Yeah. I mean, that is what this is all about. The basic human needs beyond food and shelter are, love and recognition and a sense of importance and self.
Do you hear any political candidates talking like that?
Not offhand.
I don't know of any.
I don't know of any.
It's a sad state there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Hillary gets close a few times, but then kind of skids off in another direction. But I don't know. I certainly don't hear it from any of the Republicans.
No, just the opposite.
Right.
Just criminy. I mean, really. Anyway, I'm gonna be, going for a walk or something right now.
Good job. Me too. After this,
enjoy the birds and what's left of what we've got here in the park, and just take a deep breath.
Well, Anne, thank you so much.
Thank you for calling in.
Sure, and read the book. Don't forget Russ's book.
Yes.
It's got some wonderful things in there.
He gave me a copy. Thank you.
Mission to Peace. You can get it through the Point Reyes bookstore.
Yes.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Anne.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left here, right? There's so much more to cover. But I think, in closing, I don't know what your closing thoughts are, Bernie, but I'm not as optimistic as Anne. I guess I'm realistic or pessimistic, or I've gone too far into the dark, ugly truth of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, and that my only hope actually through all of this is that none of it is even remotely sustainable. That we're definitely on a sinking ship, and this is an empire in its final death throes, and it can and it will collapse. It's just a matter of time. And so, I believe we have to inform ourselves, wake up, and yes, I get angry, definitely furious, and then that we need to mobilize and act and stand up and say, that's it, enough is enough. We've had it with this. And I think that civil unrest is actually happening in the US and across the world. And I think that, the revolution is starting to build, and the power holders, the mostly men at the top of the military-industrial complex, I think they're worried about that. And that's why I think we're going to see an increase in these so-called terrorist attacks. Well, I didn't speak about false flags, and I won't now because we don't have time. But I do think that many of these so-called terrorist attacks are false flags. And so, what better way to control the masses than to convince them there's a terrifying enemy out there, none of us is safe, and we have to go to war and unite and defeat them. It's the oldest military trick in the book, Bernie. It really is. It's been used for thousands of years. So, yeah, I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
I'm afraid you're right. And I think, though, the thing I look forward to that forcing the end is peak oil. I mean, we're in that last scramble for the last fossil fuel deposits throughout the planet, and it's getting more expensive to go after that. And at some point, we will not have the energy, the fossil fuel energy, to drive this colonialism, imperialism.
Amen.
And it'll come to an end. So
I wish to thank all our listeners and our callers today for your participation. I hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11 because your voice really does matter.